Meany. I'm the superintendent in Brookline. And what we want to do tonight, thanks so much for coming. It's really nice to have you all here. This is a very exciting piece for us at the beginning of a very long process of looking at the high school. So what we're not going to do tonight is show you all the slides that show our enrollments, because I know a number of you have been at those presentations, you've seen those things over and over again, right? Yeah, a number of times. But what we know is that by 2022, Brookline High School has somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,600 students. And today we hold 1,800. 1,900, thank you. And so we've begun this process to look at what happens as our elementary groups, which continue to get larger, move here. And as we begin to look at identifying this as our top priority in our discussions with the MSBA. So again, we're right at the beginning of a process, and one of the great things about this process, like our devotion process and other elementary projects before that, is we've tried to focus what we're looking at doing here around the educational program. Not building a building for the sake of the building, but really talking about what are we trying to accomplish in terms of the educational program, what are future trends saying about high schools, and what do we want to incorporate here, and how do we look at those kinds of things. And from the beginning, and you'll continue to hear this over the next X number of years, this conversation is about sort of three buckets of possibilities. Right? So one is, can we accomplish what we want to accomplish on this site? Can that actually happen here? Can you create something that works for 2,600 students on this current site? And what does that look like? How does it function? How do you get there? The second is, should we be looking at, or one other bucket is, are we looking at a second high school, a second distinct high school? Right? Because if 2,600 doesn't work here, that's another possibility to look at a second high school, whether it's the same size, whether it's smaller, whatever it may be. And third, are there possibilities to incorporate a building in the proximity of this campus, right, in some kind of other way, whether it's as a specialized program, whether it's as a particular grade level, whatever that may be. So think of it just in round terms of the, could you incorporate the old Lincoln School, just for the sake of discussion, as a permanent part of this campus? I know that's a little bit of a reach to this campus, right? And what would that look like? What kind of programming could you do there? What would that look like? And then begin to substitute other places. And so we've tried to look at this in those three buckets in terms of the possibilities. And that's all the further, that's where we are. So no decisions have been made, and no decisions are going to be made tonight. There's a lot more work to do. The very next thing that will happen is that you will begin to hear the Board of Selectmen and the school committee talk about a statement of interest, an SOI, term we throw around a lot. So in April, we have to submit to the School Building Authority, the MSBA, our top priority for a project. And the thinking has been that we will now identify Brookline High School as that top priority and begin to identify what needs to happen. So that's the longer term. I feel the need, however, here to get in sort of the statement about the short term. So where's Hal? Hal and I disagree, Hal Mason, assistant headmaster here, and I disagree from day to day as to when we get to a point where the number of students that we are projecting that are coming are no longer going to work in this facility. But we agree that it's sometime in that 2018, 2019 time period. Right? We've been working at what those short-term accommodations are that get us there. So even after we've moved everything out of the high school that's not part of the high school program, adult education, our early education programs, all those kinds of things that occupy spaces, we know that in that time frame we begin to run out of space to house the population that we have. And so we're also looking at short-term strategies, and some of you have seen in a number of these functions, so you know that some of that interacts with our elementary plan. We're using Old Lincoln School for devotion school. If we get out of there soon enough, it's available for the high school by 2019. All these things begin, hopefully, to fit together and keep us from employing some other pieces of the strategy. So I said to someone this morning that I was going to do it this way. So if this is the timeline to looking at where we're going with Brookline High School, right? Here's where we are. This is where we are as we stand here tonight. This is very preliminary discussion. In fact, the school building authority would scold us if we were much further than that. So what our consultants are going to take you through tonight is some work around the educational program that we've done to date, some of their testing of some of those possibilities, and the kinds of things that we may be able to start talking about as we submit that SOI and begin to work at what the possibilities are for high school education in Brookline in the coming years. So I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to go till about 8:30 tonight. I'm the timekeeper. And so I'm going to ask Deb Holman to walk you through a little bit of the work that's been done with the consultants, with the staff here around the educational program. And again, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Bill. Welcome, everybody. Great to see you here. I know there are some BHS parents and some parents from elementary school, so welcome to Brookline High School. Deb Holman, this is my third year at Brookline High as headmaster, for those who don't know. And I come from Newton, in the Newton Public Schools, Newton North specifically, where I was vice principal and history teacher for many, many years. So if you do the calculations, you can tell that I went through the now famous Newton North High School building project in that amazing new building. And you might be thinking, oh good, that headmaster has gone through this project before. You might also be thinking, what is the matter with that woman that she wants to do it again? Sometimes I wonder that too. But the most interesting difference between the Newton project that we started 10, 15 years ago and the Brookline High one is that even in that, let's say 10 years, the conversation is different. Because at Newton North, we took the program that was in the old building and we transferred it over and plopped it into this new, amazing, modern building. But we transferred the program one for one almost. And it's a wonderful program. But the things that have happened in education just in the last 10 years and with teaching and learning and how kids learn and how we use technology and instructional technology and how a second grader or a third grader takes to the online world in ways that, you know, we 48-year-olds can't even follow and imagine how they do that. Those things, I think, force a different, big, and impactful conversation, which we at the high school have been having for the last 2.5 years and very intensely with SMMA for the last 8 months. Faculty, staff, parents, and students have been involved in what we call our BHS 2020 vision, where we're imagining ourselves in the year 2020. We don't know if that will be a big renovation here, if that will be a second high school elsewhere, but our goal is how do we serve, say, 2,600 students well, because we're serving 1,900 students very well today. So some of the things that we would absolutely keep at Brookline High School, because we are an excellent school, is our focus on equity, our focus on excellence and achievement for all kids. Classic teaching. I talk to the teachers about this, and I say there will always be room for classic teaching where students are learning at the elbow of master teachers, whether it's in math, English, science, social studies, history, which is my area. We will be excellent and we'll keep our focus and our delivery of services and learning to students with disabilities because that's a value. We will keep our liberal arts focus, and we will keep reading, traditional reading, text and digital. But we'll develop some new things also in our BHS 2020 vision. We talk about this a lot. One of the tenets of the BHS 2020 vision is what I call kids designing, driving, and directing their own learning. We are turning learning over to the kids in micro ways in the classroom and also macro ways in our program. We're integrating technology in different ways and exploring how to do that in the future. We have new focuses on creativity, design, STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. We have some really neat things going over in our Unified Arts building right now in the basement of the building. The old basement of the building is where the construction engineering program is, And we have moved our engineering teacher from the third floor science wing over here, over into this big, enormous space where we teach our our 2 auto classes. And so you've got this teacher and kids spilling out into the hallways, taking over this enormous space, which we actually start envisioning as a maker space or some sort of fabrication lab over in the UAB. So we're thinking about synergies and spaces. We're thinking about senior alternative programs where a student will do a year-long senior project where they will be choosing a passion project, designing, driving, directing their own learning. So the visioning work that we did in 2 very intense sessions in June and September with SMMA was very much a 40,000-foot view of big values and aspects of teaching and learning and high school learning as it relates to some opportunities that we really see we're going to have in the future with renovations or with a new building. Again, like Bill said, no decisions yet, of course, lots of thinking and lots of movement toward continuing to serve well, not just the 1,900 that we have here today, but 2,600 kids. So that's where we are. I will turn it over to Phil Quinelli and Alex Pitkin from SMMA Architecture Firm.
Great, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here this evening to speak with you about the project. You've already heard Makerspace, Fab Lab, lots of terminology that may not be part of what it was when you were in school. We've put together a glossary of terms that includes those and a whole lot more, so people can pick that up. Many of you already have on the way in, but that might be very helpful to you. I'm Phil Quinelli, educational planner, Alex Pitkin, lead designer and architect, and so this is your team, the steering committee that has been working with us, or with whom we've been working. Me and Alex, and the other person is David Stephen from New Vista Design, who led the visioning process for us. This is a very complex project, so we thought we'd keep the agenda very simple. Define the problem, and 44% student increase is a problem. Create opportunities for 21st century teaching and learning. I think there's a lot of this that Deb already identified is already going on in the school by students and staff, teachers, but a building can contribute to how efficient that is and what the possibilities are in a rather significant way. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And conceptual options, again, these are not intended to be design options or designs. What we're doing is testing out ideas. The idea, can this campus support the additional students? If not, where might they go and why? What are the pros and cons of that kind of exploration? So, population, you've already seen it at the K-8 levels and have been dealing with it. There's a need for additional classrooms, for labs, and other support spaces. There's an awful lot of spaces within the existing building that are undersized, and we'll show you some graphics on that. Flexibility is one of the things that as education delivery changes, as student populations go up, flexibility is going to be something that you're going to need both in the short term and the long term. So that's a big part of it. So 21st century teaching and learning, what is it? Well, there's no one thing that defines it. There's an awful lot of pieces that go into it, but some of the tenets that revolve around what they call the four C's, the skills of 21st century learning: collaboration, communication, creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. And so, what are some of the methodologies used in delivering that? And so you're already talking about active learners. Sitting in a classroom listening to someone lecture is passive learning. Getting involved and being part of what's going on is the active learning. Project-based learning, which is very often interdisciplinary, and how environments can affect that. We spoke about the integration of technology and blended learning, the idea that it's could be partly online, it could be partly with computers mixed with traditional learning, and so on. So there's lots of different methodologies that are being employed currently, and new facilities or rework facilities can enhance that. The third teacher is the environment. The idea that that the building, the campus, the community is a component to teaching, service learning, and so on. So that's a big part as well. And as we go through a process of discovery of how buildings might be developed, are there other organizational ways of generating an environment for the school? The way it works currently, as opposed to academies, freshman academies, thematic houses, STEM, lots of different schools are working in different ways. The graphic there is Quincy High School, and at Quincy High School they incorporated not only a freshman academy, but thematic academies as well. So we see lots of different ways of organizing things in different schools, and it's really a matter of communities deciding what's best for them. Conceptual options, the expansion of the existing campus. Can we work with the Tappan Gym, the old Lincoln, the Boylston Street playground? We've been exploring property here, 111 Cypress Street, just conceptually. And again, is it that a new high school? Is it a second school? Is it a second campus of this school rather than a second school? And there have been a series of studies over the last few years that have led up to this. The master plan done by MGT, the B-Space study, and the HMFH concept study. And this is a graphic from that study. And they produced 15 different options of where you can build on this campus and how it might take place. And a lot of very good work that can be drawn from. We explored some other ideas and that we're going to show you. So here's the population was at 1,800. Now it was at almost 1,900 at the beginning of the year. It's probably over that now. And there's our 5-year projection of nearly 500 and 800 in 10 years. But a 44% population increase has the potential to have some real implications. So how do you deal with those? We've been through a very detailed process of looking at the curriculum and the master schedule and figuring out how many spaces are needed to deliver that curriculum. And as the student population grows, how many additional classrooms are needed. And so here's a chart that simply shows, and the impact is largely in core academic spaces, but the classrooms that you currently have, the number you need for 1,800, by the math, you're already 3 classrooms short. But as you go through with 2,100 students, 2,600 students, there's a growing need for classrooms through the school. And we've been through a process of looking at the main building here and identifying every one of the spaces and how they're used in the school. And then we looked at all of the spaces from a size standpoint, and as compared to the MSBA guidelines. And everything in orange is somewhere between 5 and 24% undersized compared to their current standards. Everything in red is greater than 25% undersized. So this is just a snapshot to give you a sense of sizes of spaces. So there's the second floor, current use, second floor in terms of what we refer to as MSBA deficiency. Seeing a lot of orange and red up there. Third floor, current use. Third floor, MSBA deficiency. And what you're seeing over here are all science lecture labs that are significantly, in many cases, significantly undersized. Fourth floor, and again, same thing. So what we've identified is the need for 24 additional, going out 10 years, need for 24 additional classrooms. Now some of those classrooms, as we create new science rooms, because it's difficult to make a small science room with the right size, if new science spaces are created, then the existing science spaces can be converted to general education rooms. So there's a need for 24 classrooms, some of which will be by taking on new spaces or existing spaces within the school. The science classrooms, as I say, are significantly undersized. The MSBA standard is 1,440 square feet. Many of yours are 900, 1,000, 1,100, significantly undersized. Special education classrooms and spaces are needed. The cafeteria needs to grow by 70%. The library has to double in size, again, compared to MSBA standards. And I think from those who use the spaces, people probably wouldn't argue with those numbers either. And so that ripples through the school in lots of different types of spaces. So we started, we had 2 visioning sessions in June and in September. It was an invited program. We had about 50 people come in representing students, teachers, staff, parents, community leaders, and most people who attended both sessions, so they built on each other. And the idea was to really spend a day going through exercises of how they envision the school, what they liked about the school, what didn't work so well, and where they wanted to go. A lot of the items, the statements in black are items that were identified by the participants in envisioning, and in blue, some of the ideas that conceptually can help make those spaces work. So hands-on and experimental learning and learning by doing, the maker spaces, the ability to create and test out ideas. CTE, as your existing program, is an expansion of project-based learning. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but lots of different ideas of what the community and the students would like to see and how that's possible to be reflected in a built environment. A few more here, and lots more phrases that came out of the process of visioning. Just some quick shots of, there's your existing library and learning commons as they're being designed and built today in schools around Massachusetts. Typical existing classroom, thankfully we don't see them all lined up as I move around the school teachers are trying to get them into circles and conversation spaces, but this type of furniture is very difficult to make that happen. But these are the types of environments with flexible furniture and lightweight that can be set up for discussion, for debate, for lots of different types of activities. And corridors in their sort of stagnant way of just circulating through, and a few cutouts where a little informal learning can take place. But in schools today, we're creating environments where teaching and learning can go on anywhere in the school, in the corridors, throughout the campus. Again, just a little peel away off of the corridor, and it's able to be used for acting out ideas and so on.
Thanks, Bill. Again, Alex Pitkin from MSBA. And one of the other things that we're really aware of in the design of a lot of these interdisciplinary programs is what we call critical adjacencies. And that's when we looked around the program placement throughout the high school, what would be the opportunities for creating where we rub shoulders with the different disciplines, if that was the desire within your high school community. And so these, you're going to start to see some shapes in this conversation, and you start to see a shape like this, which is shown as more of a square or a pod or a cluster versus what we would call double-loaded or egg crate type of organization of classrooms. And some of these methods may not be able to overcome in an existing building, but at least they give you a foundation for how we might try to help the programs actually interconnect, and how they might move around and become part of a STEM or interdisciplinary organization. And some of the ways that those spaces start to interact collaboratively, a lot of transparency. Obviously that's a little more difficult in an existing building, and having the ability to actually see into spaces and making sure that all these connections are visual, that students' work is actually projected out and throughout the high school environments. And then of course, you start to ask immediately, can the school's infrastructure handle the new equipment that is starting to be found in these types of spaces and in these types of programs? Obviously new layers of technology, and obviously types of equipment as well. And then programs, we talked a little bit about project-based learning, and this is not necessarily relevant, but the idea was when we start to talk about visioning, well, how does this reflect itself? And here's an interesting program that one day used to be called Home Economics. Well, it's actually fashion technology down at Quincy High School, and it has lots of layers of interesting technology. And of course, one of the things I think is an interesting driver for high school students today is they're watching the cooking shows on TV. So like my children, they're watching the designer programs, and they're getting very excited and interested in how they can actually influence their lives through these activities. And so in a program like this, they're not just learning how to sew, but they're actually working on technology, on computer-based programs. They're learning how to set up and display their work and to actually interact. And there's a dramatic component to that too. So when you start to talk about these programs, you're really infusing students in this space. And then we want to take our eye, of course, sustainability. Obviously, the campus environment too really allows for connecting to the environment. Obviously, it's your town, but it's still a very dense and urban environment. So how can you maximize that and take advantage of it, whether it's going up as you have in the past, taking advantage of rooftop solar panels as you have, and also outdoor learning environments. And then connecting that all back through interactive medium, which is completely available today and very useful throughout the sciences. And you have a student restaurant as well. This is an example of how that can actually start to interact in a community way and fashion that, again, through some of the programs that your children might be watching on television, professional type environments, where they're going to actually, again, do some of this project-based learning. business programs within school. They're actually selling product and learning how to do the things that are common in business practices, and then actually all the things that might revolve around a true restaurant environment. So, jump into some of the conceptual options that we've been talking about that are physical, and trying to layer in some of the concepts educationally that Phil was talking about. And so, I'm going to start with the expansion within the existing building. And just for the folks at home, we're obviously looking at the Greenhouse Street facility. It extends over further to the tap and gymnasium. Obviously, there's a pool building, which is part of the recreation component. It's a little dark here, but you can see the UAB, the Unified Arts Building. There's a small parking lot that's also part of your campus. And we put that into a model form so that we can start to continue to show, hopefully in a very clear manner, how expansion might impact either the existing building or the campus in general. So we went back and we didn't want to repeat some of the important studies that you've already completed. We wanted to expand on some of the either very good ideas or test them a little bit further. And here are some of the highlights of some of the things that we've looked at. The 1949 gymnasium, which as you become a much larger school, only continues to become a smaller gymnasium and PE environment. So we said, well, obviously it's in a pretty prime academic location, so we do think that that's an area that might be considered for further analysis for academic program expansion. It's a two-story space, tight. Nothing is easy on this list when you go into further study, but that we think is something to consider. Expanding the cafeteria, it's quite undersized, as Phil had mentioned. So are there ways that we can think differently? We don't just design cafeterias that are hidden in the back of schools anymore, that are only used 3 times a day. They're lively spaces that are common spaces that allow students to actually interact socially. You just can't afford to give up that kind of space for that amount of time during the course of the day. So this is a key component of any modern high school campus. And then the fact that the media center in its current location is quite small led us to sort of ask the question about a learning commons. Is there a chance to increase that space and get more flexibility and function out of a library and treat that as a learning commons? Phil had shown that 4th floor, there's a little sliver, and you'll see it again in a couple more slides, but it's a very inefficient use of space. Very few students get up there. Is there a way for us to think about making that more simply efficient by growing the school up on the 4th floor? Not easy, yet again. And then rethinking the sciences, getting those rooms to the right size. In the chart that you saw earlier, it's literally doubling the size of the sciences. How can the building afford to actually expand simply within the sciences? If MSBA were to say you have to right size your science rooms, and we're not saying that they would necessarily demand that, but that is something that will bear a lot of consideration, because there are concerns for the number of students in labs of a small size. And then, of course, once you start to right size some of the rooms, those science labs are not bad sizes for standard classrooms if they were repurposed. So it's something to keep our eye on. And then, does this then afford us a chance to move and distribute some of the sciences if they can't all grow and fit in one area, to now start to think about interdisciplinary programs? It's very unusual for all the sciences to be clustered today. They do react to different students at different grade levels and different types of learning going on. So again, it's an opportunity for you to start to think about that as a program element. And of course, that obviously leads into those conversations about STEM and STEAM. And then this is a little bit of a lightning rod, right? Expanding the courtyard. And we do know that it's an area that is very sacred within the school community. We put it back in there because it seems like every meeting that we come to in a public forum, which hasn't been a lot, but the question is, well, why aren't we expanding into the courtyard? So again, the MSBA will put you through a rigorous process, as you already know, because you've done schools with the MSBA. And so if it's something that gets put off the table, at least we've shown the due diligence and gone through the answering the question. So quickly, again, the existing high school footprint. This is the 1st floor. And what you're going to see then are the areas that we started to target for some of these ideas that we just described. And so if you do take the gymnasium space and you start to put right-sized science labs and you start to put maker spaces in, you can start to see there's 6, 7 rooms potentially available. So you can start to see the impact of growing to the right size types of spaces. Superintendent Lupini talked about moving some of the non-specific high school programs out. Many of those are actually targeted in this corner of the high school, and so that might be an opportunity to start allowing for whether it's some of the support spaces, the restaurant, trying to find a way to help to grow the commons concept, maybe outside of the existing footprint of the existing school, teacher planning spaces, etc. And then we also targeted this back corner as you start to climb the hill as if you were to take the gymnasium out of the existing high school, there's a lot of space underneath. Could we give that back to the custodial, building storage, and start to make sure the upper floors are really focused on academic pursuits. Moving up to the second floor, this is the Library Media Center. You can see it's got that donut hole, beautiful lobby as you enter the building, and its impact. And so what we did is we actually see a very efficient layout of classrooms on the floor above this. And so what we just did in this diagram is we just moved that down. And we said, let's take advantage of efficiency aspects within the school and make sure that we can get as many of those classroom counts up to the numbers that Phil had talked to, short. Now here you can see the second floor interstitial space in the gymnasium, and we decided to take advantage of the fact that the gym is 2 stories, and the tighter buildings become with more children in them, the more they require spaces that are special and differentiated, right? If everything's just a simple 10-foot high space, then it becomes a pretty oppressive environment to learn in. And so we didn't actually just pack in every classroom, we left ourselves a little bit of flexibility in this particular area. And moving up to the third floor, here you can see that now that the science labs have been completed on lower floors, now you might start to build media or commons, media center, learning commons up on that level. It's still central to the overall donut of the existing high school, and now you can see those science labs being repurposed as right-sized classrooms. And then here's the fourth floor that I was talking about, a very small sliver of space. It's easy probably to get lost up on that floor. You've got more stairs and more elevators, which just make it even less efficient. And so we targeted an idea of maybe trying to expand on that back footprint that I had shown you before, where we make it more of an academic piece. Again, not an easy solution, but it's something that might at least also help that environment on that upper floor. One of the things we also wanted to show is transformation. So if you do stay on the footprint of the existing high school, this is that very specific corner in the high school. And I think you may remember the photograph of the picnic table kind of stuck in the corner, kind of an uncomfortable space. But it's got some daylight, and it certainly does some of the things that we've talked about in terms of having a self-directed learning environment for students. One of the things that will happen as 500 and 800 more children end up in the high school is corners that are hard right-hand turns, corridors that are stacked with both ramps and stairs, and they're ubiquitous throughout the school, start to make pinch points, start to make areas where students are bumping into each other, where just things that have not been a problem in your school just tend to start to make for more challenges for the administration, for the students themselves, a less pleasant environment. And particularly when you think about these, between classes and class passing, these are actually 2 toilets, and that's where a lot of the students are headed. So we took this very specific moment in the school, and we said, well, what if you move the ramp out, open it up so that you can ease the corner, and so within your existing building, you target areas that will help when the student population rises within the school. And so these are about social aspects of school design, not just about the academic piece. But you can imagine things like teachers coming out into the hall, taking advantage of these moments, flexible furniture within, and really improving the opportunities within your existing school. And these are all concepts that are trying to put a physical and visual identity to the 21st century concepts that Phil was talking about.
Great, putting a lot of transparency in there as well.
Yes, thank you, Phil. Yeah, a lot of, again, we talk a lot about student display, making sure that the students really have an opportunity to connect across all of their disciplines during the day. This is just a quick model shot, and not a lot of expression of this outside the four walls of the existing high school. So this is just to illustrate what happens if you do go beyond the boundaries of the cafeteria space, if you were to increase the fourth floor, if you were to try to bring daylight down into some kind of construction activity on top of the gymnasium. So again, talking about communicating with the neighborhood and being in a very densely populated part of the town. And then just quickly, it's not a typical classroom, but it's the courtyard, the beloved space. And what are big ideas that are out there if you were to start to talk about capturing that as interior space? You wouldn't just build additions inside the courtyard. That would be counterproductive because we need the daylight, we need the airflow. We want that space to be a cultural center for the school. But there are ways that have been done with historically focused courtyards to capture that space. Is that where a true student, part of the student commons maybe belongs? And now you can say that you've space mined and you found all that space that's below this space in the existing cafeteria, and how could that be repurposed? So those are ideas that the community can start to have a conversation about. And then we're going to flip the order here. We're just going to talk about the one campus opportunities once you extend past the boundaries of the Greenhouse building. And so we were asked to look at if the old Lincoln does become available, or if the Boylston Street Park becomes available. Those are about a half mile as the crow flies. There's intersections and streets to be crossed. And then the 111 Cypress property is within about a quarter mile. And then you can see where the UAB, which is half that again. So some of the ideas that we've, again, tried to expand on the previous studies, if you take the gymnasium out and convert that to academic space, then you've got to rethink Tappan Gymnasium as a competition and physical education facility. Detention. Rethinking the sciences of STEM and STEAM, you can see that there just wasn't enough space for the 23 required science lab classrooms. And so what happens? Do they either move to the Unified Arts Building? Do they go to a different facility? Do we build on the parking lot next to the Unified Arts Building? These are all deeper programmatic conversations. And then, of course, expanding the campus boundaries to the 111 Cypress Street, Old Lincoln School, or the Lincoln School Playground. And then are there opportunities? We understand the Board of Selectmen has begun a search for properties within the town boundaries, and we'll hear more about that. And then some of the things that have been mentioned and just are simply sort of off the table, which is building on the Cypress Playground or park space. It's just not in the cards from a historic perspective and an open space use. Removing the swimming pool to expand the school, we thought that was something that was probably an important program for the high school as well as for the undergrad, so we steered clear of that one as well. So this is a quick shot to show sort of the influence of all of that build out. No one is saying, no detailed programming has occurred to say that you would need all of that space. That's for another further study. But that would be the kind of questions you would start to ask is, well, if you build that, do you need any of this? Do you need any of that? And you could start to mix and match some of the different various ideas going forward to meet the amount of square footage you need for the 2,800 students. We're just making everybody aware, we're highly aware of the MWRA line that does run below the parking lot site next to the These are more questions and comments posed to you in the community, the pros and cons as the steering committee has started to address and talk about these elements. If one campus is extended or expanded, well, everybody really likes this high school here, right? And status quo is not a bad thing. And amplifying that would be a very positive thing. It's an opportunity to address all the spaces. Potential use of the old Lincoln School, still up in the air. Potential acquisition of nearby property, again. Intended retention of programs not normally funded by MSBA. So this is just a detailed study down the road as to, you can't really answer these questions until you're talking directly face-to-face with the MSBA. And you've been through that before, so that's nothing new. Clearly an opportunity to right-size all or most of the science labs, some academic classrooms. And then that's just a repeat of the first bullet, the third bullet. And then, how big is too big? It's a question we hear over and over. Some folks have asked the question, is there an end to this population increase? And obviously you can't really predict out past 10 years. You just have to continue to evaluate and watch where things are going. So some people have also asked what happens if the program shrinks after 10 years. And those are easier things to deal with when you think about it. And then some of the programs moving off-site, that might be considered a negative in many people's eyes. There's no question we're talking about densifying, what about parking, what about traffic. And then ultimately the 600-pound gorilla is what about phasing? What will be the impact to my child in the school? And that hasn't been really a part of the study, but it's understood.
So we want to go back and look at the idea of a second school or a second campus, just briefly, and talk some of the issues through. We've said that that would be part of the what's called Module 3 of the Feasibility Study by the MSBA. but what is the impact on teaching and learning by creating a new environment that may be some distance away? How many programs can be replicated in a building? So if you're building a second school, are you essentially taking that same curriculum and repeating it in another location? Very difficult to do, very costly to do from an operational standpoint. So is it a themed second building, or is a component of the high school moved over there, wherever there is? So these are some important issues that you're going to have to deal with. What's the impact on culture, on operating costs, and if there's an MSBA project that's taken off this campus and built someplace else, that leaves this building as it is in the eyes of the MSBA. That doesn't suggest that the town couldn't do renovations to the building on their own, but it would probably be a fair length of time before the MSBA would be ready to address this building if they had built another one someplace else. And there are a lot of unique programs in Brookline High School. There are 80 singletons. What do you mean? What do we mean by that? Classes that are taught for only a semester, or there's only a single section of that class. There's a lot of different reasons why it's a single class, and it's a full class, but there's only one class of it, not a series of sections. And so how, if that's the case, then do those 80 not get offered at the second school without it being a themed school? The CTE, the programs that you have, again, they're well attended and actually a requirement of, in many cases, for graduation. But the idea of being able to replicate all of those in another location very difficult, very costly to do. And then there's a lot of programs within the school, SWS, Opportunity for Change, lots of programs within the school that are they replicated in a new location. There's Brookline and the schools located here. We mentioned that there's a study going on to see whether or not there are sites available elsewhere in the town for schools. It's, I think, primarily focusing on the K-8 right now, but certainly once we see what's available, there may or may not be possibilities from that. A previous study, one of the previous studies identified Lars Anderson as a potential site, but that's probably politically unrealistic as well. So I missed this. Okay. So if you were to build a new school, what are some of the pros to it? That it can become a state-of-the-art building right from the beginning, and all of the things that we're talking about of 21st century teaching and learning are just automatically included in the design of the school. And you do have an opportunity to create a magnet school of some sort through a special focus, and if that's something that is something that the community would like to do, that is a good opportunity to do that. It does create smaller learning communities, but at the same time, if you were redoing this building, you'd look to see if you can create small learning communities within this building as well. I've spoken about many of these already. The curriculum offerings and programs are difficult to offer into schools. Busing is likely required with a second campus, and costs, long-term operating costs, are probably well, they're certainly higher than what they would be now, and how you actually define what those would be would take a fair amount of work. So that's where we are. What are the next steps? We talked about the SOI, and that's going to be moving ahead. There's the steering committee, we and the steering committee are going to talk more about what's going on to move forward with a traffic study of this area and the possibility of developing costs for some of the ideas that we produced today. I want to reiterate that although a lot of what we looked at looks like design, it's not intended to be design. It's testing. If this is a complex building, to be able to say, can you or can't you expand this campus, we really felt as though we had to go into some detail. I think that the idea that this is possible to do is great, and if the project moves forward, the designer would probably put all of this aside and start from scratch. But at least we've tested it out. So with that, we'd like to open this up to a discussion, questions and answers, or discussion, however you'd like to do it.
So I'll moderate that. Actually, let me start out with a question. You had a piece, thank you for that, that was terrific. You had a piece up there about unreimbursable spaces, and many people here who've been inundated with our elementary conversations know about multi-purpose rooms and auditoriums, that piece. But specific to high school, because this is a new learning experience for all of us, there's been a couple areas in particular that we've focused on in that. Could you just talk about one of those?
Well, there are programs in the school that are going on in the school today that, like the early childhood program, that is not something that the MSBA participates in. And so, moving forward, if they were participating in renovation of this building, they very likely would not participate. They would not allow that to happen.
How about specific high school programs like dance?
Again, the physical education and athletic facilities that the MSBA allows today, or specifies today, is significantly less than what you have. The Tappan building is a resource that you would never be able to duplicate from the MSBA standpoint.
Great, thank you. So are there questions that you have? Yes, sir.
So I see the first bullet point up there is select approach. I'm wondering what the time frame is for picking one of those three broad options.
So,
You know, the only, we're looking at it only from the standpoint of can we develop some conceptual costs around this so you have an idea. There's no actual selecting of an option as part of this process. That's going to be part of the MSBA process. So the way it works is submit the SOI in the late fall or early winter of this year, the December timeframe. The MSBA would decide whether or not to accept Brookline High School into the program, and then that would start a feasibility study. And the feasibility study has to look at no build, ad reno, new construction, multiple sites, and so all of these things that we've been looking at are going to be done again in a MSBA format, and so this is leading up to that, and this is all going to be very helpful. What we've done to the process for the MSBA, it's certainly important and critical to the process for the town, because you need to be able to move the SOI forward. The SOI has design dollars associated with it, and so there's a political process that this hopefully will help the community in getting to the next step.
If I may have one follow-up,
Sure.
who makes that decision? How is that? Is it the MSBA? How does that work?
So it's a building committee. The MSBA process requires the creation of a school building committee. So right now we have a building committee appointed by the selectmen and the school committee. Is that right, Ms. Charlovsky? Look at Ms. Charlovsky. Yes, appointed by the selectmen and the school committee. There are certain roles on that committee that are prescribed by the MSBA, and then there are others that the town is allowed to create their own. So it's town administrator, school committee rep, building committee representative, board of selectmen representative, superintendent, some other members of my staff, the principal, parents are all part of that committee, and they have decision-making authority in a number of these areas.
Yes, two questions. One, this presentation you made, I presume it'll go online at some point. Can you describe that, give a picture of that? That's one question. Second, I believe you folks are involved in the Winchester High School project. Can you give some guidance as to how much that has wisdom that we might look at to understand better the issues here, and how does it differ?
So the first question was around this presentation and where it will be accessible. I'm looking, Mr. Basic and Mr. Rowe. Generally speaking, we've established places on the town website where all of the particular presentations and documents around any particular project, there's a devotion central now on the website, and then we can create links from the high school website and the district website to that. You can get them through the town website.
And will this be just slides or slides with commentary?
It will just be the slideshow itself.
But what we've been able to do in a number of cases, and we'll try to do here, I'll leave this to Mr. Basic, is we've taken videos of presentations like this and actually been able to link them along with the slides.
And the second, Winchester High School, and relevance or non-relevance?
So Winchester High School, you might also, I know you've been involved in other high school projects, you might comment on this.
Yeah, so Winchester High School, it's an extraordinarily different building. It's a very unforgiving concrete frame structure. There's absolutely no opportunity to build a new school in that town, within the town limits. So politically, that was a hurdle to overcome. There was an infill courtyard, not nearly as nice as your courtyard, but that we took it upon ourselves in working with that building committee to transform the school. And that really, I think there are a building that looked like a 20th century educational facility, converting that into a 21st century environment by creating that student commons right at the heart, by shifting programs around and rubbing shoulders. We've shown in the past to the committee how we've taken their old shops and have moved some programs around to create a STEM and STEAM environment that should come online in another year or so. So it's also a phased construction, so a very complicated CM at risk process, but we think that everyone is really kind of working together on that, so it shows that it can also be.
So there are some lessons to be learned there.
Absolutely,
But
yes.
not total.
It's not the exact same picture. There will never be an exact same scenario as where.
But an opportunity to create new adjacencies, for example, which is an important part of how the classes go together, and that same kind of adjacency transformation is possible here.
So since you used the term CM at risk, you better define that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
for people.
apologize.
That's okay.
Are you using that at the devotions?
We are.
Okay, so construction management at risk process, and so that allows your community to bring in a select contractor, in effect, who can build a team rather than just having to take a low bid contractor, general contractor. And in the case of phased construction, we have found it very helpful to allow for safety, security, for really analyzing costs a little bit deeper up front, and really helping the community kind of, because they're on board pretty early in the design process, not just at the end of the design process. So if you have a good team and everybody's playing nice and working together, it can really be a better outcome for the community.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
I'll start by making a statement. I like the alternatives that are closer to the school better. The more close to the school, the more attractive they were.
How did I do this?
So I found the alternatives that are more in place, more attractive than the others, but they may not be enough to solve the whole problem. So is the idea of, is it possible to use the school further in the afternoon somehow to support? Because the space is less used during the afternoon than during the day. Is that a possibility at all?
Do you want to comment on that? I mean, I can't.
I would assume
Sure, the process for the issue, can we lengthen the day and use the schedule that way? We can. There are hurdles of collective bargaining, et cetera, around expanding the day. We've looked at that as one of the potential short-term strategies that we may need to use if we don't have other buildings accessible to us. But beyond that, can you do a comment on that?
Not much reality.
Right, right. No, we've looked at it more as a short-term strategy.
I was thinking perhaps like some special activities or programs could be done.
Oh, sure, absolutely,
More than
absolutely possible. They may, that may go on in North, beyond the maker spaces and those kinds of things beyond the day? Okay. So those spaces do give you opportunity for more of those kinds of things. Yep.
Yeah, I hear that problem solving or solution to that. To move in that direction, you'd have to really have a community conversation, school community conversation about what things in the afternoon that are sort of set, such as our athletics commitment to the MIAA. And so if you had kids after school in activities or specific classes, they would be opting out of some of those after school activities. So it's a big scheduling puzzle, but point heard.
But what we do know, to your point, is that those kind of spaces draw kids to programs. I mean, a great example is our partnership with Brookline Interactive. 5, 6, 7 years ago, we didn't have the access television on this campus. Since then, we've added classes. Those classes are all filled, whether they be in animation or in TV studio, they're all filled. And when they run programs after school for kids, both middle level and high school kids, those programs are filled. Yes, ma'am.
Just wondering also about some short-term solutions. So the freshman incoming class is going to have maybe 30 kids in a classroom, I assume, something like that. It's coming next year's freshmen, and I don't know about this year's freshmen. Seems like every class is growing and growing. What about the kids in the next 3, 4 years, next year, the year after that, and the year after that. What about them? Should we cancel some electives? Should we do something to make sure that the core courses, the math, the science, the English, aren't overflooded with kids, so that the learning doesn't get degraded?
Okay, so let me try part of that, because a lot of what you asked about isn't about building, it's about operating budget, right? So class sizes are going to go up depending on operating budget for the next X number of years, not because of this building, okay? So we're up around 1,900 now. I think we're looking at some slight increase again next year. We didn't bring those slides tonight. We thought we'd spare people for one night. But those numbers don't really begin to climb until I think it's 2018-ish in that number. Yeah, 17 or 18. I'm looking at Hal Mason. And so while some of those numbers have gone up slightly in some classes over the last number of years, it's not been because of the building, it's been because of our operating budget. And they won't climb in that time period necessarily because of the building. Now, you get to 2018, 2019, then it becomes much more of a space issue. And that's why I started this by saying we're looking at those short-term strategies. Does that mean use of the old Lincoln School immediately following devotions being finished with it? Yes. And it's one of the reasons we're trying to pay so much attention to the timeline on that devotion project, because we need short-term space. Does it mean we have to do something about the schedule here? So some people have been in sessions where they've heard me talk about sort of a modified double session schedule that we might be in a position, if we don't have other space available to us and we get to 2018 or 2019 without those solutions, that we might have to look at those modified kinds of approaches. The problem with the other idea that you lay out about whatever, pick X course, say cutting back on X courses so that we can do more Y, is we still need courses, right? Kids need schedules. We have a 7-period day. By law, we're supposed to have full schedules for all kids, right? And so if we don't offer classes, they can't take them. And so if we cut back on elective courses to run more math, science, whatever, we're still going to be short courses. So we have to be able to run an array of courses so that students can fill a schedule. And you heard the headmaster talk up front about our attention to trying to pay more attention to filling the schedules with meaningful activities for seniors. Because quite frankly, in this country, my opinion, the senior year is less than satisfactory. So if anything, we want to bolster the number of experiences that kids have in the senior year. So we're going to have to look at both keeping those courses and trying to find ways to run more. But those issues are largely operating budget issues and not having to do with what we do in terms of the project year, at least until 2018. Yes, sir.
So in the existing footprint study, have you done enough analysis at this point to determine whether you could actually create enough space for 2,600 students?
We didn't go through a detailed program. As Phil had mentioned, there was really core academic space analysis. It would really be a full in-depth program to get to that answer, to find that.
And in addition to that, there needs to be more exploration of the physical structure of the building as well, to know what it is we can and can't do to the building. So it's going to involve a whole lot of study on a detailed basis.
And the MSBA would be very upset with us if I told you the answer to that question was yes, because they would not want us to be at that point right now before we even submit an SOI.
But we did want to give the steering committee a sense of, maybe you noticed there was a little bit of a cataloging of how many classrooms and science labs, so we did want to be able to keep a little bit of a running tally, because that, if we couldn't get there with those numbers, then that was a critical answer on the one campus on the existing building. Question?
Can you give us a sense of timeline to how many years we're talking about to get to basically a physical solution in place, recognizing that there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done. You just mentioned that you need to do an engineering study of the building to see, what wall can be moved without taking the roof down. What's the process?
You lay out a really rough timeline that we'll, of course, hold you to.
So
Which will
we
hopefully
talked
give
about-
us a conservative
Yes,
answer, which is
sure,
really what I'm looking
Sure.
So we talked about a year for the SOI and getting MSBA to come on board.
Right.
And then the feasibility study itself typically takes about a year. And that's exploring lots of options and coming to what's called a preferred solution. Another year to design the project, so we're up to 3 from today. And depending on what's built and how and where it's built and how the phasing takes place, a new building takes at least 2 years to build, and a phased project can take 3, 4, 5. And so, how is that done? Typically, you build the new space first, because you need the additional space, you build the new space first, you occupy it, and then you start in with a phasing of building and what we call leapfrogging, building, occupying, and vacating, building, occupying, vacating, and very likely the need for portable classrooms that could go out in front of the building or on Cypress Park for a limited area for a short period of time. So there's lots of things that we've thought about of how that might take place. But we're talking about 6 to 8 years to really to complete a project. Is that about right?
And the only caveat on that would be, it is a very large, if you were to build a new, that's when you sort of always measure against the new scenario, because that's sort of a paper exercise, even if you don't go in that direction, right? So you can always compare cost against it. But 2,800 student school probably is more like a 3-year construction project. That's a very large building.
And we projected this out, in early documents, we projected this out as sort of a 2022
Yeah.
final solution in place, so that's consistent with that.
I'm remembering these phase discussions
Yep.
we had. It was basically 5 years from the time that the recommendation was accepted to the shovel going in the ground and the school being completed. I'm trying to get a sense of what this is. This is obviously a larger piece of work.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you gave some really good thought to this. Kudos to you. It's a complicated project. I didn't hear what is lost by using the gym for science classrooms. So what is the requirement for the state for gym space? And how do you make up for the fact that we would lose a gym, which I don't understand completely how much it's used during the day or after school, but what's the loss?
My understanding is that the gym within this building is not heavily used for PE. Most of the PE takes place in the Tappan building. There's a lot of testing that goes on in there and other activities, but most of the PE actually takes place in Tappan. If you were building a new school, the MSBA would only allow you to build a 12,000 square foot gym. The top floor of the Tappan building is larger than that. So you can see by comparison how much less space you would have for PE. So for this school, even though it's 2,600 students, a 12,000 square foot gym, and maybe 2 additional, possibly 3 additional spaces for alternate PE, you have an entire building in the Tappan building that makes up 2 to 3 times what the MSBA would allow you to have. So
for a building of 2,600.
yeah, because they don't care. So back to your question, what are you losing? I think that from a PE standpoint, you're not losing much at all, as I understand it. And I'll let the educators. Correct. Okay. So the bottom line is it's not very heavily used space to start with right now.
have time for a couple more. Yes?
From the budget perspective, the override that we're talking right now, would that be covering the high school resolution?
So there's two, the answer is no. There's two questions right now. One is an operating budget question, and the other is a debt exclusion question associated with the devotion projects. Sorry. Operating budget, and then a second question associated with the devotion debt exclusion. Yes?
So is coupling that courtyard there, is that sort of like talking about underground parking?
Why, in what way?
Talking about underground parking, how we want to hide renovate the courtyard. Because it seems to me that parking the courtyard is one really great way to make the space not seem so crowded. One, you know,
Is it a
10 months of the year.
really significant exercise to consider something like that?
Could you repeat the
It-
question?
Yeah, the question was about, the question was about covering the courtyard, and is that the equivalent of underground parking? In other words, something that we're not going to do, something that is so far out there in terms of budget and concept, it would be very, very difficult for us to do.
It is a significant undertaking, but the potential rewards and the potential multi-use of that is something that I think is worth exploring. Does the dining commons, which becomes more of a student commons, also get integrated with the learning commons? And so, it's because it is too large to be a cafeteria, but are there multiple functions that can happen within the space and that wind up not having to go someplace else? So you wind up building less square footage, and there is.
So MSBA would pay for it, is that kind of work on?
Well,
This would be our argument. The question was, would MSBA pay for it? So it's a matter of, like anything else with the MSBA, it's a matter of negotiation and discussion about your program and about what you're trying to achieve and what you're willing to sacrifice over here to put more into over here.
I recently toured a high school in Washington, D.C. of a similar vintage that did just that. And I've got photographs someplace.
Amy, you have a question? Okay.
Yes, Bill, given that there's a clear demographic reality, you know when it's going to land, there's a problem down the road. Do you feel that the planning process right now is on track, needs to be accelerated, or is behind? I'm just curious about your own feeling as to where we stand with respect to making decisions in order to solve this problem.
I'm comfortable. I think we're comfortable with this timeline if it continues to move. I mean, we have a lot of dependencies. One dependency is that SOI being accepted. That's a very important piece for us to get in an SOI to be accepted and move. We're very optimistic about that, given what we're facing, given that this is our high school and all those pieces. I'm more concerned about that short term right now, because that short term, now I'm talking about the devotion, the short term and that plan for space and how Old Lincoln School and devotion project interacts with this. There's a direct correlation. I've been talking about it for the last at least 2 to 3 years, about the need for us to have a plan of devotion that makes that Old Lincoln School available to us for the high school, by 2019 at worst. 2018 would be great, so that we can begin to use that for short-term space until this project is finished. Once that building is available to us between this campus, again, with the right kind of phasing and the right kind of modulars and those kinds of things with Old Lincoln, we can make it work. But it's about that short-term issue and devotion. I'll just say here, because you'll see this a lot. I mean, one of the really key aspects of that is whether we're able to move all of the devotion school students out. Right? That's very important to you who are high school parents. As it may seem strange whether you're a devotion parent or not, that's a very important element, because it actually shaves a year off the project and allows us to move that project along much more quickly, makes the Old Lincoln School available to us for high school purposes much sooner. Very important to us right now. We can do one more. Anyone has a question? So remember what I said up front. decisions, a lot of great information, thank you, and a lot of work yet to be done. They mentioned some work, there is some, the traffic study, conceptual studies, SOI that we're preparing for the school committee and the board of selectmen to act on in April. That we hope to get in MSBA and then begin, the process on this building. Here's the thing. You're not going to hear much between that April submission and sometime in the fall. When the MSBA begins to consider those SOIs, it's December, January. I think this year the letters came out in January, something like that. So there's a period where we'll continue to do some of this. We may be able to come out and talk some more about some of these concepts, the results of some of these other pieces of the study. There aren't going to be decisions made. There aren't going to be big pieces to this until we see that consideration of the SOI. And our pledge to you is to keep you informed as best we can. Thanks so much for coming.